The sound of a hand striking flesh echoed through the high-ceilinged courtroom like a gunshot, instantly silencing the murmurs of the gallery. In the Superior Court of Los Angeles, decorum is everything, until billionaire CEO Preston Sterling shattered it. He stood towering over his trembling, 7-month pregnant wife, his hand raised, his face twisted in a snarl of arrogant rage. He thought he was untouchable. He thought his money bought him the right to discipline his wife in front of the law. He was wrong. He didn't look up at the bench. If he had, he would have seen the blood-red gavel rising not to strike the block, but pointing directly at him. He didn't know that the woman in the black robe, the terrifying Judge Margaret Vance, wasn't just the law. She was Grandma. Preston Sterling adjusted the cuffs of his Italian silk suit, checking his reflection in the tinted window of the black SUV. At 38, Preston was the face of Sterling Dynamics, a tech conglomerate that had swallowed Silicon Valley whole. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, jawline carved from granite, eyes the color of cold steel, and a smile that didn't quite reach them. To the public, he was a visionary. To his staff, he was a tyrant. And to his wife, Audrey, he was a nightmare. Audrey sat on the other side of the courtroom holding cell, though she wasn't a criminal. Her lawyer, a weary public defender named Arthur Higgins, had warned her that Preston's legal team would try to paint her as one. Audrey rubbed her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick. 7 months. She was 7 months pregnant with the heir to the Sterling fortune, and yet she felt like she was waiting for an execution. "He's going to take the baby, Arthur," Audrey whispered, her voice cracking. She looked nothing like the glamorous woman who had graced the cover of Vogue alongside Preston just a year ago. Today, she wore a simple grey maternity dress that hung loosely on her frame. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes. "He told me this morning. He said I'm unfit. He said I'm a gold digger who trapped him." Arthur sighed, shuffling through a stack of papers that looked pitifully thin compared to the boxes of evidence Preston's team had likely fabricated. "Audrey, listen to me. This is a preliminary custody hearing and a motion for spousal support. Preston is banking on intimidation. He wants you to break down. He wants you to scream. If you do, he wins. You have to be ice." "I can't be ice," she choked out. "I'm terrified." The doors to the courtroom swung open. A bailiff, a burly man named Officer Mendez, nodded at them. "You're up." Audrey's heart hammered against her ribs. She had met Preston 3 years ago, when she was working as a junior graphic designer at a rival firm. He had swept her off her feet with grand gestures, private jets to Paris, diamonds the size of quail eggs, promises of a family. But the moment the ring was on her finger, the cage door slammed shut. He isolated her from her friends. He monitored her calls. When she got pregnant, the abuse turned from psychological to physical. A shove here, a grabbed wrist there. She had fled 2 weeks ago, checking into a battered women's shelter in downtown LA under a fake name. But Preston Sterling had resources that rivaled the NSA. He found her in 6 hours. Instead of dragging her home, he served her with divorce papers, claiming she had abused him and that she was mentally unstable due to prenatal psychosis. As Audrey walked into the courtroom, the air conditioning hit her like a physical blow. The gallery was packed. Preston had ensured the press was here. He wanted her public humiliation to be total. There he was, sitting at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 3 lawyers in suits that cost more than Audrey's college tuition. Preston didn't even look at her. He was busy typing on his phone, looking bored. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. "The Honorable Judge Margaret Vance presiding." Audrey froze. Judge Vance? That wasn't the judge assigned to their case. It was supposed to be Judge Harper, a man known for favoring wealthy husbands. A hush fell over the room as the door behind the bench opened. A woman stepped out. She was in her late 50s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and glasses perched on a hawk-like nose. She moved with a terrifying grace, her black robes billowing around her. She didn't look at the files. She looked straight at the plaintiff's table, then at the defendant's table. Audrey's breath hitched in her throat. She lowered her head instantly, her hands shaking violently over her stomach. It couldn't be. Preston finally looked up, annoyed by the change in schedule. "Who is this?" he whispered to his lead counsel, a shark named Roger Banks. "Where is Harper?" "Harper had a medical emergency this morning," Roger whispered back, looking uneasy. "This is Vance. She's tough. She's a visiting judge from the Federal Circuit. Hardliner." Preston scoffed. "Everyone has a price, Roger. Just do your job." "Docket number 4492, Sterling v. Sterling," the clerk announced. "Motion for emergency custody and restraining order." Judge Vance sat down, arranging her robes. She didn't pick up the gavel. She simply clasped her hands and stared at Preston Sterling. Her eyes were dark, unreadable, and intensely focused. "Counsel, state your appearances," Judge Vance said. Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight that vibrated in the chest. "Roger Banks for the plaintiff." "Preston Sterling," Roger said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He oozed confidence. "Arthur Higgins for the defendant." "Audrey Sterling," Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Banks," Judge Vance said, her eyes never leaving Preston. "I have reviewed the emergency motion filed by your client this morning. You are alleging that Mrs. Sterling is a danger to herself and the unborn child." "We are, Your Honor," Roger began, launching into his rehearsed speech. "My client, a pillar of this community, has tried everything to help his wife. But Mrs. Sterling has a history of erratic behavior. She fled the marital home without cause, putting the fetus in distress. She has been seen associating with drug addicts in a downtown shelter. We have affidavits from household staff stating she throws violent tantrums." Audrey squeezed her eyes shut. "Lies. The household staff were paid to spy on her." "She throws tantrums?" Judge Vance repeated slowly. "Is that so?" "Yes, Your Honor. Violent ones. In fact, Mr. Sterling fears for his life." A ripple of laughter went through the gallery. Preston was 6'2" and built like a linebacker. Audrey was 5'4" and pregnant. "I see," Judge Vance said. She turned her gaze to Audrey. For a fleeting second, the judge's mask slipped, revealing a flash of profound pain, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Mrs. Sterling, do you have a history of violence?" Arthur stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is character assassination. My client left the home because she was terrified. Mr. Sterling has physically intimidated her on multiple occasions." "He's lying," Preston blurted out, standing up. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Judge Vance snapped. The command was like a whip crack. Preston blinked, surprised by her tone. He slowly sat down, a smirk playing on his lips. "Your Honor," Roger Banks continued, "we have medical records indicating Mrs. Sterling refused psychiatric care. We are asking for immediate, sole custody of the child upon birth, and for Mrs. Sterling to be remanded to a psychiatric facility for evaluation." Audrey felt bile rise in her throat. They were going to lock her up. They were going to take her baby. "And," Roger added, pulling out a document, "we have evidence that Mrs. Sterling lied about her background. She claimed to be an orphan from Ohio. But our private investigators found inconsistencies. A woman who lies about her own mother and father cannot be trusted with a child." Audrey's head snapped up. Her face went white. She looked at the judge. Judge Vance was staring at the papers Roger was waving. "Is that relevant to her parenting ability, Mr. Banks?" Judge Vance asked coldly. "It goes to credibility, Your Honor. She's a fraud. She targeted Mr. Sterling for his money. She has no family, no support system, no roots. She is a drifter." Preston leaned back, crossing his arms. He looked at Audrey with pure contempt. He mouthed the word, "Nothing. You are nothing." "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said, "is it true? Do you have no family?" Audrey stood up, her legs shaking. She had to speak. Arthur tried to stop her, but she pushed his hand away. "I have no family that I am in contact with, Your Honor," Audrey whispered. "Why is that?" The judge's voice was softer now. "Because," Audrey fought back tears, "because I left home 10 years ago. I wanted to make it on my own. I didn't want to be defined by where I came from. And when I met Preston, I thought I found someone who loved me for me. Not my last name." "A likely story," Preston shouted, standing up again. "She's a liar, Judge. She's trash from the gutter, and she's trying to steal my company's reputation. Mr. Sterling, you will sit down, or I will hold you in contempt," Judge Vance warned, her eyes narrowing. "I don't have to listen to this," Preston yelled, his temper flaring. He wasn't used to women telling him what to do. He pointed a finger at Audrey. "You think this court can save you? I bought this city. You're going to end up on the street where you belong, and I'm taking my son." "Mr. Sterling," the bailiff stepped forward. "No." Preston pushed past his own lawyer. He marched toward the defense table. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Preston's face was red, veins bulging in his neck. He loomed over Audrey. "You tell them!" Preston screamed, spit flying. "Tell them you're crazy, admit it!" Audrey shrank back, covering her stomach. "Preston, please, admit it!" And then it happened. In a blind fit of rage, forgetting the cameras, forgetting the judge, forgetting the law, Preston Sterling swung his right hand. Crack! The slap connected with Audrey's cheek with sickening force. She cried out, stumbling back and falling into her chair, clutching her face. The courtroom went dead silent. Roger Banks, Preston's lawyer, buried his face in his hands. He knew it was over. Preston stood there, chest heaving, realizing what he had just done. He looked around, expecting fear, expecting submission. Instead, he heard a sound from the bench, a low, scraping sound of a heavy wooden chair being pushed back. Judge Margaret Vance was standing up. She wasn't looking at the bailiff. She was taking off her glasses. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a fury that made the air in the room drop 20 degrees. "Bailiff," Judge Vance said, her voice a low growl that didn't need a microphone. "Lock the doors. Nobody leaves." Preston sneered, trying to regain his composure. "She provoked me. Did you see that? It was self-defense." Judge Vance slowly descended the steps from the bench. She didn't walk like a judge. She walked like a predator. She walked right past the stenographer, right past the plaintiff's table, until she was standing 3 feet from Preston Sterling. She was smaller than him, but in that moment, she seemed 10 feet tall. "You struck her," Vance whispered. "She's my wife," Preston spat. "This is a domestic matter. I want a recess." Judge Vance ignored him. She looked past him, at Audrey, who was weeping silently, holding her cheek. The judge's eyes filled with tears. "Audrey," the judge said softly. Audrey looked up, her vision blurry. "Mum." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Preston froze. He looked from Audrey to the judge. He looked at the silver hair, then at Audrey's blonde hair. The nose. The eyes. "Mum?" Preston repeated, a nervous laugh escaping him. "What is she talking about?" Judge Vance turned her gaze back to Preston. The sadness was gone. Only fire remained. "You said she was a nobody," Judge Vance said, her voice rising. "You said she had no family. You said she was trash." Judge Vance stepped closer, invading Preston's personal space. "She is Audrey Vance," the judge declared, her voice booming through the courtroom. "Daughter of Senator William Vance and Superior Court Justice Margaret Vance. She is the heir to the Vance political dynasty. And you—" The judge smiled, a terrifying, shark-like smile. "You just slapped my daughter in my courtroom." The silence in the courtroom following Judge Margaret Vance's declaration was so absolute it felt heavy, suffocating. It was broken only by the sharp, ragged breathing of Audrey, who was still slumped in her chair, a hand pressed against her reddening cheek. Preston Sterling, for the first time in his life, looked small. The arrogance that usually draped over him like a cloak had evaporated, replaced by a dawning, horrific realization. He had not just slapped his wife. He had slapped the daughter of a federal judge and a sitting U.S. senator. He had assaulted the scion of one of the most powerful political families in California, a family he had dismissed as non-existent because Audrey had been too proud to use her name. "You're lying," Preston stammered, his eyes darting between the furious woman in the black robes and the weeping woman in the grey dress. "Audrey is a nobody. She told me she was a nobody." "Officer Mendez," Judge Vance said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. She did not look at Preston. She was looking at the red mark forming on her daughter's face. "Take the plaintiff into custody." "On what charge?" Roger Banks, Preston's lawyer, practically shrieked, jumping to his feet. His face was pale. He knew the law, and he knew they were currently drowning in a legal catastrophe. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. You must recuse yourself immediately. You are related to the defendant. This is a mistrial." Judge Vance turned slowly to face Roger Banks. The look she gave him would have withered a redwood tree. "Mr. Banks," she said, enunciating every syllable, "I will recuse myself. Oh, you can be certain of that. I will not preside over the divorce proceedings. However, what just occurred happened in facie curiae, in the face of the court. I witnessed a violent assault committed in my presence. As a callous disregard for the safety of this courtroom and the rule of law, I am finding your client in direct criminal contempt." She turned to the stenographer, whose fingers were flying across the keys. "Let the record show that the plaintiff, Preston Sterling, struck the defendant, a pregnant woman, during an active session. Bailiff, arrest him. Charge him with felony assault and battery and direct contempt of court." "You can't do this," Preston roared as Officer Mendez, a man who had clearly been waiting for an excuse to tackle the arrogant billionaire, grabbed Preston's arm. "Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? I pay your salary." "Turn around, Mr. Sterling," Mendez grunted, spinning Preston around and slamming his chest against the defense table. "Ow! You're breaking my arm!" Preston yelled. "Stop resisting!" Mendez shouted, clicking the handcuffs onto Preston's wrists. The cold steel ratcheted tight, tighter than necessary. The courtroom erupted. The few reporters who had been allowed in were frantically typing on their phones, sending out the scoop of the century. Billionaire CEO assaults wife in court. Wife revealed to be Senator Vance's missing daughter. It was going to break the internet in less than 10 minutes. Judge Vance knelt beside Audrey's chair. The Your Honor persona melted away, leaving only a terrified mother. She reached out a trembling hand, but hesitated to touch Audrey, as if afraid she might shatter. "Audrey," Margaret whispered, her eyes welling with tears. "My baby." "Oh God, Audrey." Audrey looked up, her vision swimming. The shock of the slap and the adrenaline dump were making her dizzy. "I didn't want you to know," she sobbed, pulling away slightly. "I didn't want to come back a failure." "Failure?" Margaret choked out. "Audrey, we've been looking for you for 10 years. Your father. We thought you were dead. We thought—" She saw the bruise on Audrey's cheek, and her expression hardened into granite. She stood up and turned back to Preston, who was being dragged toward the side door leading to the holding cells. Preston was struggling, his face purple with rage. He locked eyes with Margaret. "This isn't over!" Preston screamed, spitting on the floor. "I'll bury you! I'll bury this whole court! My lawyers will have me out in an hour! And I'm taking that baby, you hear me? That baby is a Sterling!" Margaret Vance walked to the edge of the bench. She picked up her gavel, a heavy piece of mahogany that had served justice for 20 years. "Mr. Banks," she said to the trembling lawyer, "your client is remanded to the custody of the Los Angeles County Jail. Bail is denied due to flight risk and the immediate, violent threat he poses to the victim. If you want to appeal, you can take it up with the appellate court. But until then, he sits in a cell." "Denied?" Roger Banks gasped. "For a slap? Your Honor, that is excessive." "He assaulted a pregnant woman in front of a superior court judge," Margaret said icily. "Get him out of my sight." Mendez shoved Preston through the door. The heavy metal clank of the lock engaging echoed through the room. Margaret turned to the bailiff. "Clear the courtroom. Now. Everyone out." As the gallery shuffled out, buzzing with the scandal, Margaret turned back to Audrey. Arthur Higgins, the public defender, was standing there with his mouth open, looking like he had just witnessed a nuclear explosion. "Mr. Higgins?" Margaret said softly. "Yes, Your Honor," Arthur stammered. "You did a good job protecting her," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm taking over as her legal guardian for the moment. Call an ambulance. I want her checked out at Cedars-Sinai immediately." "No ambulance," Audrey whispered, clutching her stomach. "Mum, I just want to go home. Not the mansion, just somewhere safe." Margaret knelt again, taking Audrey's hands. They were cold. "I have a safe house, a place nobody knows about, not even your father. We're going there. You're safe now, Audrey. The nightmare is over." But as Margaret helped her daughter stand, she felt a chill. She knew men like Preston Sterling. She had sentenced drug lords and gang leaders, but men like Preston were different. They didn't use guns, they used influence, they used money. And Preston Sterling had just been humiliated in front of the world. He wouldn't stop until he burned everything down. The Los Angeles County Jail holding cell smelled of bleach, sweat, and despair. It was a stark contrast to the boardroom of Sterling Dynamics, with its panoramic views and espresso machines. Preston Sterling sat on a metal bench, his suit jacket wrinkled, his tie loosened. He was seething. He wasn't afraid. He was insulted. "Guard!" Preston yelled for the 10th time. "I need my phone call. I know my rights." A guard walked by, dragging a nightstick along the bars. "Quiet down, Sterling. You're in processing. You wait like everyone else." "I am not like everyone else," Preston hissed. "Do you know what I can do to you? I can have you fired. I can buy the bank that holds your mortgage and foreclose on your house just for fun." The guard stopped. He looked at Preston with a mixture of amusement and disgust. "Buddy, you just slapped Judge Vance's daughter. You're the most hated man in LA right now. Even the Aryans in B Block are talking about it. You touch a pregnant lady, you don't make friends in here. Keep your mouth shut if you want to make it to arraignment." Preston slumped back. Vance? The name tasted like poison. How had he missed it? He had run background checks on Audrey. His security team, a private firm called Aegis Corp, had assured him she was a nobody from Ohio named Audrey Miller. She had played him. The thought made his blood boil. She had lied to him. Finally, The heavy door buzzed open. Roger Banks hurried in, looking like he had run a marathon. He was sweating, clutching his briefcase. "Get me out of here, Roger," Preston commanded, standing up. "Right now." "It's not that simple, Preston," Roger said. His voice hushed. "The media is in a frenzy. The video leaked." "What video?" "Cameras aren't allowed." "Someone in the gallery. Maybe a clerk. It's on Twitter. It has 20 million views in an hour. Massed Sterling abuse is the #1 trend globally. The board of directors is calling an emergency meeting. Their stock dropped 14% since the slap." Preston slammed his fist against the bars. "I don't care about the stock. I care about my freedom. Fix it." "Judge Vance has recused herself, obviously," Roger explained, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "But she set the bail status to remanded. That means no bail until a new judge reviews it. And because of who she is, and who her husband is—" "Her husband," Preston narrowed his eyes. "Senator William Vance." "Yes." "The chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee," Roger whispered grimly. "Preston, you didn't just kick a hornet's nest. You kicked the sun. Senator Vance is on a plane from D.C. right now. He's going to want your head on a pike." Preston paced the small cell. He needed an angle. He always had an angle. He thought about Senator Vance. Old money. Conservative. Family values platform. A slow, cruel smile spread across Preston's face. "Roger," Preston said, his voice low. "Get me the phone. Not the jail phone. The burner you keep in your briefcase for delicate matters." "I can't give you that in here. It's a felony." "Do it, or you're fired, and I'll tell the Bar Association about that settlement you buried for the mayor last year." Roger turned pale. With trembling hands, he slipped a small black smartphone through the bars. Preston snatched it. He didn't call his PR team. He didn't call his CFO. He dialed a number he had memorized years ago, a number that belonged to a man who operated in the shadows of Washington, D.C., a man known only as the Architect. "Sterling," a distorted voice answered on the first ring. "I'm in a bind," Preston said. "I see the news," the voice replied dryly. "You were careless." "I was provoked. Listen, I need the Jericho file." There was a long silence on the line. "That is a nuclear option, Preston. Once you open that box, you can't close it." "I want it opened," Preston snarled. "Senator William Vance. I know he took donations from the cartel shell companies in the 90s. I know he buried the investigation into the Port Authority trafficking ring to protect his donors. I want it all. The senator is a powerful enemy." "He's coming for me," Preston said. "I need leverage. If he wants to play the protective father, I'll show the world what kind of man he really is. I'll burn his legacy to the ground, and tell the boys at Aegis to find out where Margaret Vance took Audrey. I want my son. It will cost you triple." "Done." Preston hung up and slid the phone back to Roger. He adjusted his cuffs despite the dirt on them. "Go tell the press I'm a victim of a mental health crisis," Preston told Roger. "Say I was under extreme stress. And tell the board to hold tight. By tomorrow morning, the Vance family will be begging me to drop my lawsuit against them." Meanwhile, across the city, a black armored SUV wove through the traffic, escorted by 2 police motorcycles. Inside, Audrey lay with her head on her mother's lap. It was a position she hadn't been in since she was 12 years old. The safe house wasn't a house. It was a penthouse apartment in a building owned by a shell corporation Margaret used for high-risk witnesses. It was a fortress in the sky. Audrey sat up, wincing as the car hit a bump. "Why didn't you look for me?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her soul for a decade. "I waited. For the first year, I waited for you or Dad to come get me, to tell me you were sorry for trying to control my life. for trying to marry me off to that senator's son." Margaret stroked Audrey's hair, her face etched with pain. "We did look, Audrey. We hired private investigators, the FBI. But you were good. You changed your name, your social security number. You vanished." "I learned from the best," Audrey said bitterly. "Dad taught me how to disappear." "Your father—" Margaret hesitated. "He broke, Audrey. When you left, he became a ghost. He threw himself into his work because he couldn't stand the silence in the house. He blames himself every day." "He was a tyrant," Audrey said. "Just like Preston. That's the irony, isn't it? I ran away from a father who wanted to control every aspect of my life, and I ran right into the arms of a husband who did the exact same thing. I have a type." "You were young," Margaret said fiercely, "and Preston Sterling is a master manipulator. He fooled the world. Don't you dare blame yourself for his violence." The car pulled into the underground garage. Security agents swarmed the vehicle. "We're here," Margaret said. "We have doctors waiting upstairs, a full OB/GYN team." "Mum," Audrey grabbed Margaret's hand. "Preston, he won't stop. You saw his eyes. He has something. He looked confident." "Let him try," Margaret said, her voice regaining that judicial steel. "He's in a cage, and your father lands in 2 hours. Between the two of us, Preston Sterling will never see the light of day again." But as they exited the car, Margaret's phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message from an old contact at the Department of Justice. "Margaret, be careful. Chatter on the dark web. Someone is buying the Jericho data dump. It's about William." Margaret's blood ran cold. The Jericho file. It was a rumor, a ghost story in DC circles, a compilation of blackmail material on every major politician from the last 20 years. If Preston had access to that. She looked at her pregnant daughter, battered and exhausted. She realized this wasn't just a custody battle anymore. It was a war. "Come on," Margaret said, ushering Audrey toward the elevator. "We need to get you upstairs." "What is it?" Audrey asked, sensing the shift in her mother's mood. "Nothing," Margaret lied. "Just work." But as the elevator doors closed, Margaret Vance knew that the slap in the courtroom was just the opening shot. Preston wasn't just fighting for custody. He was fighting to destroy the Vance dynasty, and he might just have the ammunition to do it. The penthouse safe house was a marvel of modern architecture, floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the sprawling Los Angeles skyline, marble floors and art that cost more than most houses. But to Audrey, it felt like another cage, just a nicer one. She sat on the plush velvet sofa, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. A team of private doctors had just finished their examination. The baby was fine, miraculously. The stress had elevated her blood pressure, but the little boy inside her was a fighter. He was kicking, a steady thump-thump against her ribs that served as a reminder of what was at stake. The elevator doors chimed. A heavy, rhythmic set of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Audrey held her breath. She knew those footsteps. She had spent her childhood memorizing the cadence of her father's walk. Heavy, purposeful, authoritative. Senator William Vance walked into the room. At 62, he was still an imposing figure. He had the kind of silver hair that looked like it was sculpted, broad shoulders that carried the weight of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and eyes that usually scanned rooms for threats. But tonight, he didn't look like a senator. He looked like a broken old man. He stopped 10 feet from the sofa. He dropped his leather briefcase on the floor. His eyes, usually cold blue steel, were red-rimmed. "Audrey," he croaked, his voice cracking. Audrey stood up slowly, clutching the blanket. "Daddy." William Vance crossed the distance in 2 strides. He didn't offer a handshake or a stiff pat on the back. He fell to his knees in front of her, wrapping his arms around her waist, burying his face in her stomach. The great Senator Vance, the man who made lobbyists tremble, was weeping uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," he sobbed into the fabric of her dress. "I'm so sorry, Audrey. I drove you away. I did this. I let him hurt you." Audrey hesitated, her hands hovering over his head. All the anger she had held on to for 10 years, the resentment at his controlling nature, his obsession with the family image, seemed to lose its sharp edges. She realized that while Preston controlled her to possess her, her father had controlled her because he was terrified of losing her. It didn't make it right, but it made it different. She rested her hand on his silver hair. "It's okay, Dad. I'm here. We're safe." Margaret watched from the doorway, wiping a tear from her cheek. For a moment, the Vance family was whole again. But the moment was shattered by the vibrating of phones. Not just one. All of them. Margaret's work phone, William's encrypted BlackBerry. Even the television on the wall seemed to glitch as the breaking news banner flashed red. William pulled back, composing himself instantly. The senator was back. He pulled his phone from his pocket. "What is it?" Audrey asked, fear spiking in her chest. William stared at the screen, his face draining of color. He looked at Margaret. "It's the Port of Long Beach," he whispered. "The '98 investigation." Margaret closed her eyes. "He did it. Preston actually did it." "Did what?" Audrey demanded. "What are you talking about?" William walked over to the television and turned up the volume. A news anchor, looking flustered, was reading from a teleprompter. Breaking news coming out of Washington. A massive data leak, purportedly from an anonymous source known as The Architect, has just been released to major news outlets. The documents allege that Senator William Vance, the current frontrunner for the vice presidential nomination, knowingly buried evidence of a cartel money laundering scheme involving the Port of Long Beach in 1998 to protect key campaign donors. The screen flashed a grainy photo of a younger William Vance shaking hands with a man Audrey didn't recognize. A man the Chiron identified as a known cartel associate. The leak also alleges, the anchor continued, that the senator's daughter, Audrey Vance, didn't run away from home 10 years ago, but was secretly institutionalized for drug addiction, a story the Vance family allegedly covered up to protect the senator's career. The source claims her marriage to billionaire Preston Sterling was a sham arrangement to rehabilitate her image, and that today's courtroom outburst was a staged event to garner sympathy. Audrey felt the room spin. "That's a lie. That's insane. Nobody will believe that." "People believe what they want to believe, Audrey," William said, his voice hollow. "And Preston just gave them a narrative that makes him the victim. He's painting himself as a man trapped in a political web." Margaret paced the room, her judicial mind racing. "It's a scorched earth tactic. He knows he can't win the assault charge legally, so he's trying to destroy our credibility. If he can make the public believe we are corrupt liars, he can taint the jury pool. He can make the case look like a political hit job." "He's destroying your career, Dad," Audrey whispered, "to get to me." William turned off the TV. He looked out the window at the city lights. "My career is over," he said quietly. "If that file is real, and we know there are half-truths in there that look damning out of context, I'm finished. The ethics committee will have me suspended by morning." "We can fight it," Margaret argued. "We can prove the documents are doctored." "It doesn't matter," Williams turned to them. "The damage is done. But I don't care about the Senate seat. I care about the baby." Suddenly, the intercom at the door buzzed. "Security," a voice crackled. "Senator, there is a man here to see you, a Mr. Silas Thorne. He says he represents Preston Sterling." William's jaw tightened. "Send him up." "Dad, no," Audrey said, grabbing his arm. "Thorne, I've heard Preston talk about him. He's not a lawyer, he's a cleaner. He fixes problems that legal teams can't touch." "I know who he is," William said grimly, "and I want to hear what the devil has to say." Silas Thorne did not look like a cleaner. He looked like a university professor. Tweed jacket, wire-rimmed glasses, and a soft, unassuming demeanor. But his eyes were dead. They were the eyes of a man who had watched fortunes rise and fall and felt nothing. He stood in the center of the penthouse living room, unbothered by the 3 glares directed at him. Senator Vance, Judge Vance, Mrs. Sterling. Thorne nodded to each of them politely. "I trust you've seen the news?" "You have 5 minutes before I have you thrown off the balcony," William said, his voice a low rumble. Thorne smiled thinly. "A dramatic flair runs in the family, I see. Let's cut to the chase. Mr. Sterling is currently uncomfortable in a county jail cell. He would like to leave." "He committed a felony," Margaret snapped. "He's not going anywhere." "The narrative is shifting, Judge," Thorne said smoothly. "The public is already debating the truth of the incident. Was it a slap? Or was it a desperate man trying to stop his mentally unstable wife from harming herself? The video is grainy, and with the news of the senator's corruption, public sympathy is a fickle thing." "Get to the point," Audrey said, stepping forward. She was trembling, but she forced herself to look Thorne in the eye. Thorne turned to her. "The point, Mrs. Sterling, is that Preston has the rest of the Jericho file. What was released tonight was just the appetizer. He has emails. He has bank transfers. He has logs of phone calls the senator made to judges to fix parking tickets and DUIs for his donors' kids." Thorne paused for effect. "If Preston remains in jail past tomorrow morning's arraignment, the rest of the file drops. The senator will not just lose his job. He will likely go to federal prison for obstruction of justice. Your mother will be impeached for failure to disclose conflicts of interest. The Vance name will be synonymous with corruption." The room was silent. The threat was absolute. "However," Thorne continued, "Preston is a reasonable man. He is willing to make the Jericho file disappear. He will claim the leak was a hoax. He will use his own media empire to scrub the internet." "In exchange for what?" William asked. "Simple," Thorne said. "Mrs. Sterling recants her statement. She tells the police she had a psychotic break and struck herself. She states Preston was trying to restrain her. The charges are dropped. Preston walks free." "Never," Margaret hissed. "And," Thorne added, ignoring her, "Preston gets full custody of the child. Mrs. Sterling grants him sole legal and physical custody, citing her mental health issues. She can have supervised visitation. Once a month." "You want me to give him my baby?" Audrey's voice rose to a scream. "He'll hurt him. He's a monster." "He is a father who wants his heir," Thorne said coldly. "Those are the terms. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow. If Preston isn't walking out of that jail by 9 Morse, the senator goes to prison." Thorne placed a business card on the coffee table. "Do call. We have the paperwork ready to sign." He turned and walked out, the click of his shoes on the marble sounding like a ticking clock. As soon as the door closed, William collapsed onto the sofa, burying his head in his hands. "I can't do it," Audrey whispered, hugging her stomach. "I can't give him my son. I'd rather die." "You won't have to," Margaret said fiercely. "We'll fight. We'll expose the blackmail." "With what?" William looked up, his face grey. "Margaret, the file, some of it is true. The port deal. I didn't know it was cartel money at the time, but I found out later and I looked the other way. I did it to save the party. I did it to keep my seat. Margaret stared at her husband in horror. William. If they release the emails, I'm done, William said. And they'll drag you down with me. They'll say you knew. So what? Audrey cried. So we just let him win? We let him take my baby because you made a mistake 20 years ago? No. William stood up. He walked over to Audrey and placed his hands on her shoulders. I won't let him take your baby. I will go to prison before I let that happen. Dad, but we need a third option, William said, his eyes hardening. Preston thinks he's playing chess. He thinks he has the king and queen pinned. But he forgot one thing. What? Margaret asked. He forgot that I spent 20 years on the Intelligence Committee, William said. I know the architect. I know the man who sold Preston that file. He's a mercenary. He doesn't have loyalty. He has a price tag. You want to buy him off? Margaret asked. Preston has more money than God. I don't have money, William said. But I have something Preston doesn't. I have immunity. What? Audrey asked. If I turn myself in, William said slowly, the plan forming in his mind. If I go to the FBI tonight, right now, and confess to everything in that file. If I blow the whistle on myself. Dad, you can't, Audrey gasped. If I confess, William continued, then Preston loses his leverage. He can't blackmail a man who has nothing left to hide. And if I cooperate, I can give the FBI something in return. What can you give them? Margaret asked. I can give them the man who bought the stolen federal data, William said. Buying the Jericho file is a federal crime. Treason, actually. If I can prove Preston bought it. He used a middleman, Margaret pointed out. Thorne. Then we need to catch Thorne, William said. He looked at Audrey. We need to accept the deal. Audrey stepped back. What? We call Thorne, William said. Tell him we surrender. Tell him we'll sign the papers. But we need to do it in person. Tonight. Here. And then? Audrey asked. William looked at his wife. Margaret, call your friend at the DOJ, the one who warned you. Tell him I'm ready to talk. But I need a wire, and I need a SWAT team in the stairwell. Margaret's eyes widened. She understood. It was a suicide mission for William's career, but it was the only way to save Audrey. You're going to sacrifice everything, Margaret whispered. William looked at Audrey, then at her swollen belly. He smiled, a sad, genuine smile. I spent my whole life building a legacy, Audrey. I thought my legacy was the statutes I wrote or the elections I won. But I was wrong. He touched her cheek. You are my legacy, and I'll be damned if I let a man like Preston Sterling destroy it. He turned to Margaret. Make the call. The atmosphere in the penthouse was brittle, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Outside, the Los Angeles night was indifferent, a sea of twinkling lights masking the grime of the city. Inside, the air conditioning hummed, doing little to cool the sweat on William Vance's brow. He adjusted his tie, feeling the cold plastic of the recording device taped to his chest. It was an old-school method, a wire, but the FBI special agent in charge, a stern woman named Agent Miller, who was currently crouching in the utility closet with a tactical team, had insisted on redundancy. Digital signals could be jammed. A wire was visceral. A wire was undeniable. He's coming up, Margaret whispered, glancing at the security monitor. He's alone. Audrey sat at the dining table, a pen in front of her. The custody papers, the surrender of her life, lay waiting. She looked pale, her hands resting protectively on her belly. She wasn't acting. The terror was real. If this went wrong, if Thorne sensed a trap, Preston would release the rest of the Jericho file within seconds. Her father would go to prison, and she would lose her son. "Remember," William murmured, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Let him talk. We need him to explicitly state that Preston paid for the stolen data. We need the transaction." The doorbell rang. It sounded like a gavel. William walked to the door and opened it. Silas Thorne stood there, holding a slim, leather portfolio. He looked bored, like a man delivering a pizza rather than blackmail demands. "Senator," Thorne said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, "I trust we are ready to conclude this unpleasant business." "We are," William said, his voice steady. "Come in." Thorne walked to the table. He glanced at Audrey, offering a pitying smile that made her skin crawl. "Mrs. Sterling, a wise choice. Children need stability, and let's be honest, your current situation is volatile." Audrey didn't answer. She just stared at the pen. "The papers," Thorne said, sliding them across the marble table. "Sign here, here, and initial here. This grants Mr. Sterling full legal custody, effective immediately upon birth. It also includes a non-disclosure agreement regarding the domestic incident." Audrey picked up the pen. Her hand shook violently. "Before she signs," William interrupted, stepping closer, "I need assurance." Thorne sighed, checking his watch. "Senator, we went over this. The file disappears." "How do I know?" William pressed. "How do I know Preston won't just keep a copy and bleed me dry for the rest of my life? If I'm going to destroy my daughter's happiness, I want a guarantee." Thorne chuckled dryly. "You don't get guarantees, Senator. You get mercy. Preston isn't interested in you anymore. He just wants the boy. Once he has the heir, you are irrelevant." "I want to talk to him," William said. "He's in jail, Senator. Incommunicado." "Don't play games with me, Thorne," William snapped, channeling the authority of his 30 years in Washington. "I know he has a burner. I know he's running the show from that cell. Call him. I want to hear him say the deal is done." Thorne hesitated. He studied William's face, looking for deception, but all he saw was a desperate, defeated father. "Fine," Thorne said, "if it speeds this up." Thorne pulled out his encrypted phone and dialed. He put it on speaker and placed it on the table. "Ring, ring." "What?" Preston's voice barked from the speaker. He sounded tinny, agitated. "We are at the penthouse," Thorne said. "The senator wants verbal confirmation. He wants to know the Jericho purchase is secured." "Put him on," Preston growled. William leaned over the phone. "Preston, it's William." "Well, well," Preston laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. "The great Senator Vance. How does it feel, William, to know that I bought your life for $5 million? That's what the architect charged me. $5 million to own the chairman of the Judiciary Committee." Got him. William's heart slammed against his ribs. The confession was explicit. Preston had just admitted to purchasing stolen federal intelligence. "You bought classified data, Preston," William said, pushing for more. "That's treason." "It's only treason if you get caught," Preston sneered. "And who's going to catch me? You? You're done. Now make her sign the damn papers, or I hit send, and you spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth." Audrey looked at the phone, tears streaming down her face. "Preston, please, don't take the baby." "Sign it, Audrey," Preston shouted. "You are nothing. I made you, and I will take that boy and raise him to be a real Sterling, not a weakling like you." Audrey looked at her father. William nodded imperceptibly. Audrey signed the paper. "There," Thorne said, snatching the document. "A pleasure doing business." "Is it done?" Preston asked on the phone. "It's done," Thorne said. "I'm leaving now." "Good," Preston said. "Burn the senator. Release the file anyway." The room froze. "What?" William gasped. "You heard me." Preston laughed maniacally. "Release it all. I want him ruined. I want him to watch on the news from his jail cell while I raise his grandson. Did you really think I'd let you off the hook, William? I win. I always win." Thorne smiled, reaching for the phone to end the call. "Ruthless. I like it." Crash. The utility closet burst open. The front door was rammed off its hinges. "FBI, nobody move!" A dozen agents in tactical gear flooded the penthouse, weapons drawn. Red laser dots danced across Thorne's chest. "Hands! Show me your hands!" Thorne's eyes went wide. He dropped the phone. He reached for his jacket. Perhaps for a weapon, perhaps for a cyanide pill. But Agent Miller tackled him, driving him into the marble floor. "Silas Thorne, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit espionage and extortion," Miller shouted, cuffing him. On the table the phone was still connected. "Thorne?" Preston's voice came through, suddenly panicked. "Thorne, what's that noise?" William Vance picked up the phone. He walked to the window, looking out at the city he had served, and the city that would now witness his fall. But he felt lighter than he had in 20 years. "It's over, Preston," William said calmly. "The FBI is listening, and I imagine they're opening your cell door right about now." On the other end of the line, they heard the distinct sound of shouting, the clank of heavy keys, and Preston Sterling screaming in incoherent rage before the line went dead. William set the phone down. He looked at Audrey. She was crying, but she was smiling. He held out his hands to the approaching agents. "I'm ready," William said. "Senator William Vance," Agent Miller said, her voice respectful but firm. "You have the right to remain silent." Margaret Vance stood by her daughter, watching her husband be led away in handcuffs. It was the end of a dynasty. But as she looked at Audrey, safe and free from the monster, she knew it was the beginning of something else. 3 months later, the headline on the Los Angeles Times was simple: "Sterling guilty." The trial had been the spectacle of the decade. With the recording of the phone call and William Vance's testimony, Preston Sterling's high-priced defense team crumbled. He was convicted of domestic abuse, extortion, and federal espionage charges for purchasing the stolen Jericho data. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Senator William Vance didn't escape unscathed. He pled guilty to the corruption charges revealed in the file, the cover-up of the port deal. He was stripped of his office and sentenced to 2 years of house arrest, thanks to his cooperation in taking down the Architect Network. His political career was dead, his reputation tattered. But he didn't care. In a sunlit garden in Santa Barbara, far away from the cameras and the courts, William sat in a rocking chair. He looked older, tired, but the tension that had defined his face for decades was gone. In his arms, wrapped in a blue blanket, was a sleeping infant. "He looks like you," Audrey said, walking out with 2 glasses of lemonade. She looked healthy, the shadows under her eyes replaced by the glow of new motherhood. She had taken back her name. She was Audrey Vance again. "Poor kid," William chuckled, rocking the baby gently. "Hopefully he has your mother's brains." "He has your chin," Margaret said, stepping onto the porch. She was no longer a judge. She had retired to take care of the family during the storm. "And hopefully he'll have your courage." William looked down at his grandson. The baby stirred, gripping William's finger with a tiny, strong hand. Preston had wanted an heir to a fortune. He wanted a legacy of money and power. William looked at his daughter and his wife. He realized that the only legacy that mattered wasn't the one written in history books or bank accounts. It was this. It was the safety of the people he loved. "Hi there, little one," William whispered to the baby. I'm your grandpa, and I'm not going anywhere. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the ghosts of the past. The drama was over. The story of the CEO and the senator was finished, but the story of the family was just beginning. And that is the incredible story of how one mother's love and one father's sacrifice took down an untouchable tyrant. It shows us that money can buy silence, it can buy lawyers, and it can even buy secrets, but it cannot buy the bond of a family willing to burn everything down to protect each other. Preston Sterling thought he was a god because he had billions, but he forgot that the most dangerous creature on earth is a parent whose child is threatened. Justice wasn't found in the bank account, it was found in the truth. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of drama, betrayal, and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a new episode. Share this video with a friend who loves a good revenge story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.